Hey guys, Youngblood with you for a Picking the Right Ship video. This time we're going to be looking at picking a right touring ship that meets the needs for about 2 people or so. Now, I think this is a really appealing category because there's a lot of people out there that want a ship that offers some flexibility to go out and see the universe, visit a variety of locations, as well as just do some basic job types. So we're not really going to be picking this ship based on its combat ability or its cargo hauling ability or really anything like that, though they may be inherently good at some of those things. But instead, these are going to be ships that are going to meet your needs as a tourist or a sightseer and has the tools to empower you to do that job effectively. The requirements for these ships is going to be that it has an ability to fit 2 or more people, since you're likely showing someone around with you, has an ability to log off in the bed to continue your journey on the next day, as well as having the ability to fit a ground vehicle of some sort to empower your ground exploration. There are some additional considerations that we will cover if important, because having good fuel capacity or efficiency means that you're able to continue on your journey without delays, or really detours to refuel often. Storage capacity means you're able to hold items that you find on your explorations. Speed means that you're getting there faster or getting out of trouble effectively. And things like size of the ship are going to empower or hinder your ability to land where you want to, and general feel and just kind of overall experience in the ship. So if we start with our list of recommendations, we can look at what I would sort of call the entry level to multi-person touring, which is really going to be your Cutlass Black, priced at $110. The Cutlass, and really all of the Drake brand, is really focused on function for a bargain opposed to providing you a luxury experience. So if being surrounded in clean white and leather is important to you, then go ahead and pass over this option and probably anything Drake. However, for around $100, you're getting a super capable ship that provides a ton of flexibility. First off, you have a relatively wide and short frame, so landing spots are easy to come by when you're in a Cutlass. You have a decent-sized ramp on the rear of the ship that allows for easy access to load vehicles, which go up to a surprising size, basically allowing for anything under the Ursa rover in size to fit. So think about the ability to bring a rock for mining or a cyclone for non-mining purposes, and can easily bring several hover bikes if that is your preference. In addition to the ground vehicles, the Cuddy was actually supposed to be the smallest ship designed to carry the very snub fighter, the Mirai Fury, which it technically can carry 2 of, I believe, which means that you have some additional options available at the size of the ship. The Cutlass also has 2 side doors in the main bay that allow for easy egress, or if you like the idea of more scenic views, you can open them up and get some pretty great perspectives on the world around you. The Cutlass has 2 seats in the cockpit, one for the pilot, one for the optional co-pilot, as well as a manned turret on top to provide you with some offensive or defensive firing for someone in your crew. There's also 2 bunks, along with a lot of drop seats around the ship, so if your party ends up growing as you're playing, you can expand as needed. The Cutlass has room in the cargo bay to grab some good physical items or do bunk missions as you come across it, and boasts a pretty healthy personal storage size for holding items that you discover during your looting. The flight model on the Cutlass is decent and provides a nice experience for piloting, but it's not going to really blow you away with its speed or agility either, as it really is just a pretty well-balanced craft. If you're looking for a lower price tag with a ton of functionality on a ship that handles more like a smaller ship than large, and you don't really care about that quote-unquote feel of luxury, then the Black is a really good starting point to look at. It's also worth noting that at lower price points, you can always see if this gameplay is what you're looking for, and you can upgrade your ship to a more expensive option later if you fancy a different direction. Now, a direct competitor to the Cutlass is the Freelancer from Misk, and while I'm not going to be looking at the base Freelancer here, the 2 that I am considering are in the Freelancer line, being the Max and the Dur. I'm going to drop a big disclaimer in here and state that while the Freelancers do their jobs in the game currently very well, they are certainly in need of big updates and update passes from the developers. So looking at them may be a little bit lackluster. You're not going to get that awe-inspiring feeling compared to some of the ships that have been released since then, or at least have gone through retouching and patching. Those updates will almost certainly come, but if you want something more modern right now today, I'd advise looking at other options. However, The Max is the large hauler variant, while the Dur is the long-range exploration version of the ship, and frankly, they both do their jobs extremely well. The Dur has double the quantum fuel on board the ship, and since it uses size 2 components, it doesn't burn through a ton of fuel either, meaning you can go extremely long distances and not have to stop and refuel all that often. Or you can opt for a less efficient fuel drive and get places faster across the verse without running out of gas along the way. Here's the catch with the Dur, though. The places that it will really shine and provide value aren't really in the game yet. In today's world, you can really pick just about any of the medium ships and fly back and forth across the Stanton system a few times without needing to top off. Chances are you're landing somewhere and you're able to get gas anyway, so it's not really that big of a problem. But in the world of tomorrow, like with Pyro, we know it is vastly larger. And the fuel capacity will be a real perk, and with how things line up right now, the Dur is one of the best bets for long-range capabilities in a touring ship. It's also worth pointing out that in the world of tomorrow, when you're going through multiple systems, you're not just jumping directly to systems. You may jump into Pyro and then have to fly, a couple million kilometers before you go through another jump point, and then you go into another system and you rinse and repeat until you get to where you're going. There are implications long-term. The amenities on board the Freelancers, they're not that great. And while you can find, some value in it, it's not going to really blow you away either. You can't fit a lot of vehicles in the hull of the Freelancer Dur. You can, however, manage to get a few hover bikes in the back or a Grey Cat PTV golf cart. You can also kind of manage some of the other larger vehicles, but it's a very tight fit. You can also manage to barely squeeze a Fury into the cargo hold if you decide you want to or you need to deploy a snub fighter, but the fit is so tight that you're going to be much better off landing before deploying, or at least going, kind of stationary so somebody can kind of weasel their way out. The Max, on the other hand, offers a cavernous cargo hold that really shines when it comes to hauling vehicles. It can carry the larger, medium-sized ground vehicles like up to 2 Ursa rovers or Rock DS mining rigs, and since that is possible, many other configurations such as rovers and space bikes, rovers and Furies, or better yet, maybe just saving some room for cargo while still carrying a vehicle, and that's a real possibility. The larger ramp on the rear and the wider holes means that maneuvering the vehicles is a significantly easier task. The range on the Max is half of what the Dur can offer at 2,500, but it's still a decent range ship in its current state. Part of touring is admittedly the experience of sightseeing, and when you look at the nose and the canopy of the Freelancer, frankly, you have a pretty miserable viewing experience with that mail slot type style of canopy. If you're looking at function and don't care about outdated feel or the view out of the cockpit, because your journey begins upon arrival and unloading ground or air vehicles, or you like going into third person, then these ships are going to serve you really well. If I'm picking one Freelancer, it's the Max, because I appreciate the flexibility in this particular category, but also because it supports cargo better, which is fleshed out game loop unlike Exploration is. The two variants also share the same speed and flight models for the most part, and have the same size components, meaning you can normalize a lot of the differences besides the range or the cargo size based on which model you choose. The speed of the Freelancers compared to the Cutlass is slower, and they feel significantly heavier and less responsive, meaning they are less fun to fly. And when you factor in the view in addition to the flight model, just a little bit less enjoyable experience. The Max carries a price tag of $150, while the Dur is $135. The next ship up on the list we can't really talk about in a ton of detail because it's still in concept phase, but may not be one to sleep on either, and that's the Crusader Indices Spirit line, specifically the C1. You may wonder, why am I looking at the cargo version when there's a VIP variant in the E1? Which is a fair question, because it's because when it comes to the ability to carry a ground vehicle up to a Cyclone size, which the C1 is able to do, that's kind of the established criteria for this list, being able to manage sightseeing in a variety of ways. So it's not to say that the E1 wouldn't be a good fit, it's just lacking one of the kind of core competencies that we said the ship actually needs to have. The C1 was $110 during the concept sale and was released as a competitor to the Freelancer and the Cutlass, which were ships that we've already talked about. Crusader ships, like another that we will talk about soon, are known for being faster and more agile than expected. So while we don't really know enough about the ship yet to discuss the durability or issues with the lower component totals, we can pretty confidently say that it's going to have great acceleration and will prefer to get out of trouble by running rather than fighting. The Crusader ships also have decent cockpit views that offer the crew of two, nice experience. You have 4 pilot-controlled weapons, which I always favor ships that have pilot-controlled weaponry. It does have living space, a little bit meager, but it has beds, a kitchen area, and that shower-toilet combo behind the cockpit, and a cargo hold that can fit basically anything Cyclone-sized or smaller. I think the rock is the big question mark because it just tends to be really tall, which I think will end up being prohibitive. But since this is still in concept, we don't have a real good answer yet, and they may make changes deliberately based on the sizing of ground vehicles. Frankly, I think the C1 is a wait and see how the development comes along before selecting this as your small crew touring ship, but it certainly shows some real promise and has great design and is a heck of a value for a ship. But that's also coming from myself, who tends to be a little bit of a Crusader Industries fanboy. So up to this point, we've really been hovering between $100 and $150, which for a game is expensive, but the next ships on the list are going to start pushing that envelope a little bit. We're not looking at things like the 890 and its wild price tag because we're looking at small crew, and that's just so much ship for 2 people. However, at the $240 price point enters the constellation Andromeda. Now, many people would probably say that we should look at the $310 Aquila, and while I understand that perspective, that version is more focused on exploration by adding in sensors and scanners. And while it has a marginally better canopy experience, which is kind of perspective or preference based, it's not really worth losing a defensive turret and the increased price point, at least from my mind. The Andromeda is a really well fleshed out ship. It's gone through several balance passes and reworks and updates, with a lot of large weaponry dedicated to the pilot and a manned turret on the top and bottom of the ship, making it actually pretty deadly. It also has large shielding, so it's a pretty hard nut to crack. And in addition, aside from the cargo hold that offers enough space to be able to bring a large rover like the Ursa along, you also have a snub craft docked in the rear, the P-52 Mustang, which is a really fun ship to fly that's able to be deployed and flown by one person. That means you have a smaller ship and a rover, or you could opt for a Fury in the cargo hold and have a few ships for 2 crew members. This ship is really better suited to probably 3 players minimum, with 4 being your fully optimized crew, but is a ship that you can solo reasonably well with or be downright proficient with just 2. The Andromeda has an admirable quantum tank at 3,000 and pretty cool experience from the cockpit. The constellations can be a little bit funny to land based on the extended nose area, and sometimes the cargo ramp where you store your vehicle can be a weird experience to get level and get vehicles back into as well. But you have a lot of functionality and options. You have a decent living area, good views from the different areas in the ship, a lot of beds, impressive internal storage for good finds, and it's a pretty tough ship, meaning that even if you don't want to fight, you can run and not really be too concerned, considering the ship's not all that fast. Speaking of that, the downside of all the ability is the size of the ship, and it can feel large and drifty compared to the smaller options, and sometimes somewhat unwieldy. The speed is pretty sluggish at 144 meters per second, and 911 is the top speed in cruise, so it'll leave you feeling impatient at times. Overall, the Andromeda is a really hard ship to sleep on for all that you get in return for your investment, especially if touring is just part of what you intend to do in the verse. If you also like bounty hunting and cargo hauling, this is just a really good ship overall, but if those are kind of your primary focuses and touring is something you just want to do on the side, then the Andromeda is a really good ship to consider. Up next in the price lineup, we have a ship that's been oddly polarizing and a fan favorite, which is the Origin 400i at $250. My assumption is that there's been some beef with the ship from Origin because there was a very specific design language from all of their ships. Kind of simple and elegant designs, many of which are basically flying Doritos that kind of have softer curves. And then we get dropped the 400, which kind of has, that going on in the rear of the ship. But the pain part for most people is that it has this weird extension off the front that some people say resembles a fishhook. I personally love the design of the ship. It feels very Star Wars to me and very futuristic and a little bit more aggressive, and I think that's my personal preference. And where other Origin ships don't quite tickle my fancy because of the opulence over function, the 400 had to do more with less space and found a really nice balance between feeling nice and doing jobs well. This to me is probably the first touring ship on our list that feels like a somewhat luxury experience, while still being a very capable ship to fly solo and managing on your own with a very small crew. The actual vehicle bay is a small elevator that drops down from the front of the ship that's designed to pair with an Origin X1 hoverbike. However, other options can fit in there for now, like a Nox. Will that change over time? We'll have to see, but for now that works. If the hover bike isn't sufficient to meet your needs, though, you do have the ability to fit some other vehicles on the cargo lift. Now, while being more limited than some of the other ships that we've discussed thus far, the Mirai Fury, for example, is too wide in one of its configurations and too tall in another. So some people have found some kind of humorous ways to make it work, but in my mind, it's not really a sustainable way to use the ship and likely will lead to exploding. So you don't really have any snub fighter options for this. What does fit, though, are Cyclones that don't have the turret, or the Rock will technically fit. There's some other smaller vehicles like PTVs or bikes that fit in there no problem. I will say that Cyclones and Rock are a very challenging fit to get right, so it clearly wasn't designed with those in mind, but it can work with some care put into the experience, mostly just based on the width of the tires. The living quarters in the 400 are impressive and give you the feeling of home away from home, nice storage areas for suits in different environments, a really awesome cockpit experience, and a nice flight model that gives all of the ships on this list a run for their money, with a top speed of up to 1,250 meters per second, and responsive handling that admittedly feels like dampened to be smooth, and a large enough quantum tank to have decent range. Overall, if you're wanting to opt for viewing and traveling experience and still retain a lot of the function, even if not all of that, the others can offer, and it has some unique advantages, then the 400i is easily a front runner in this competition. At $260, we end up with one of my personal favorite ships in the game, which is the Mercury Star Runner from Crusader Industries. The Star Runner is sort of a jack of all trades, designed to be a cargo hauler, data runner, and when fully crewed, an admirable fighter, and some unique roles such as kind of data thief and smuggling ship to boot. First off, let's talk about the negatives, which in my mind there's really only a couple. First off, the doors. Oh my god. The rear ramp is the only way onto the ship. Then you either take an elevator or a ladder, then you go through a door, to another door, to another door, to another door, to another door that allows you to access the bridge. And if you've played, you know that doors take time to open, and sometimes are kind of wonky about how responsive they are, meaning it takes a whole lot of time to do anything that requires you to get in and out of the ship. For a touring ship, you're not really time-bound, so that's not the biggest concern in the world, and chances are you have a lot of flight in between you're in and out. But at the end of the day, it's not the best experience for the crew. There has been some talk of a rework adding another entrance, but that isn't done, nor changes shown yet, so we just have to wait and see what and if that will be. The other negative, again not so huge for this role, is the lack of weaponry for the pilot, which is limited to 2 size 3s. Not awful, not great. You get a lot more firepower by adding your gunners to the fray, bringing your total guns up to 6 size 3s, which is pretty decent. But since we're looking at crews of 2 or more, you can assume that you'll get some help. But if you're the only one doing anything, it is pretty undergunned. But aside from that, you have a massive ramp on the back of the large cargo hold, meaning that you can fit multiple of any ground vehicle smaller than a ballista into the rear of the ship, meaning you have a ton of configuration options in how you outfit for your journey. You also have one of the better flight models in the game with a ship that has amazing acceleration, impressive handling, basically meaning that if you need to get out of trouble by boosting and taking advantage of top speed, you can. I also appreciate ships that accelerate well because not all of us have a ton of time to play. So for getting out of places like Orison, that can take a lot of time to climb. Higher top speeds, good boost values, and acceleration factors make it possible for you. Additionally, for your crew, you have a lounge area that provides some value from, a place to hang out, which I think is a soft add. Like being able to play a real game of chess is something you can do. Maybe not a real important thing, but it is interesting. Along with smuggling and access to areas under the floor of the ship. Overall, the MSR is one of the most well-rounded ships in the game, and while it doesn't feel luxury, it feels new and updated and is a good experience, and it empowers this gameplay in a very meaningful way. Now, there's going to be two honorable mentions here that I want to give before wrapping this video up. First off, the $425 600i Touring Edition. It is a hell of a ship and a lot more than needed for the purposes of this video. But it is so well balanced and managed that it works well with just two people. So when you're looking in this category, even though it is expensive and more than necessary, it has to be included in the recommendations even if the price tag is really high compared to other ships that do the job really well. The other is the Nomad. The Nomad has an interior living quarters and the truck bed that allows for vehicle transport, but the reason that it isn't on this list is because the lack of secondary seats. Your buddy can technically hang out in the back of the ship or lay down in the bed, but they don't tour in the same experience that you do as the pilot, so it's not really kind of fair to include in the list. I think it's a really great option for a lot of reasons. The price is right too, but if you have somebody that wants to ride shoddy, it's really not it. So that's kind of my list based on the arbitrary constraints that we chose for this topic. I think when it really comes down to it, the 400i is probably my top recommendation. It's just a really good experience. It's a well-balanced ship. It feels nice. It looks nice. It does the job well. But, if you kind of want a lower price tag, then I think the Freelancer Max is probably my follow-up or secondary option here. But all of these really fit some need and kind of meet the overall experience. So that's going to be it for this video. If you guys have questions, please let me know. If you guys are interested in learning more or want to kind of join the community and get a little bit tighter, I do have a Patreon page or YouTube memberships that will get you into my Discord channel where you can talk to a bunch of other space nerds. But aside from that, like I said, that's really it. I hope you guys have yourselves a good night. There will be a lot more content coming soon. Have yourselves a wonderful day and take care.